What's up guys, Jack here, and welcome back to the channel. So recently I've been doing a lot of browsing on this subreddit called r/homelab. It's basically a bunch of home admins, coders, and tech enthusiasts that build these systems in their own house to control their own networking, handle their own streaming services, host all of their own cloud storage, and even setting up dedicated hardware for their own game servers. So me being the nerd that I am, I wanted to build my own home server with 3 goals in mind. 1, I want to be able to cancel my Netflix, Disney Plus, and Hulu subscriptions. So I want to be able to host all of the shows and movies that I want to watch and want to be able to stream them anywhere. 2nd, I want to have dedicated hardware to support running a game server for me and my friends. Right now, I'm just going to throw modded Minecraft on there, but in the future, this could be anything like Call of Duty servers, DayZ, or some of our other favorite games. Lastly, I wanted this to be an all-in-one cloud storage solution. I packed 12 terabytes of storage into this build, so I'll never see one of these notifications from Google again, telling me that my pictures are overflowing and my Google Drive needs to be cleaned out. So with those goals in mind, I spec'd out an ITX build in the Fractal Terra. This case caught my eye a couple years ago, and I always knew I wanted to build a PC in one. I just finished revamping my mid-ATX tower. You guys can click on that video here if you want to check it out. But I really wanted to challenge myself with an ITX server build here, and I think the end result came out really clean. So with that, let's head over to the desk, and I'll show you guys the parts I picked out, and we can start building our home server.
Okay, so getting into the build here, this is the case I use for the build. This is the Fractal Terra in Jade Green. It's a super compact mini ITX case. It's fully made out of anodized aluminum and has a little walnut panel on the front. I think it looks great, and it'll be perfect for this home server build. So we're just gonna go ahead and take the doors off. The doors just swing up and then unclip with these little latches, and then you can just pop off the top panel as well. Inside, you have the largest silica packet I've ever seen, as well as some screws and cable management in a box. So here's the ITX motherboard I got for the case. This is a Asus B150i. I got this off Facebook Marketplace for about $50. This has an LGA 1151 socket, 2 RAM slots, and it also has an M.2 slot on the back that we're gonna use as well. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and cannibalize a few parts from my old PC build. Just wiping off some old thermal paste from my processor. This is a 6700K. This is a 4-core, 8-thread CPU, and it's gonna be perfect for this home lab build. So now just popping out the RAM. This is a 4x4 kit of DDR4. I eventually am gonna end up swapping it out for a 32 gig kit. So just slotting that processor into the new motherboard here. And again, this motherboard only has 2 RAM slots, so this is only 8 gigs of RAM here. Again, we're gonna upgrade that to 32 later on. So this case has support for a few fan locations. This is a thin 15mm Noctua fan that I'm gonna put underneath where the power supply goes. You can also mount a few extra fans on the outside bottom of the case if you want some additional cooling. So now I'm just slotting in the motherboard. This already has standoffs pre-installed, so I'm just gonna put it into place. And it has 4 or 5 screws that you need to tighten down. Go ahead and apply my thermal paste here to the CPU, and then I'm slotting in this low profile Noctua cooler. I don't have the exact model number, but I'll put it in the description. I think this thing's only like 35mm tall, so it'll fit nicely inside of our ITX case. Now this is the small form factor power supply I chose for the build. This is a SF750 Corsair power supply. 750 watts is a bit much for the hardware we're using right now, but eventually I might put a graphics card in here, so I want to have that extra capacity if needed. As you can see, it's fully modular. It comes with individually sleeved cables, which you guys know I'm a huge fan of. And the case has a little bracket that you can actually pop off here, and you're gonna go ahead and line that up with the power supply, tighten it down, and then put the bracket back onto the case. And then that just has a little daisy chain power cable since the port is facing vertically. So I immediately realized that I was gonna have to take this off to plug in the cables. I'd recommend putting your cables in before because the routing is a little tight in here. So just slotting in the braided cables I need into those ports. Now with the power supply reinstalled, we can go ahead and start doing some cable routing, just plugging in that 24 pin, the motherboard 8 pin, some of the fan headers, and then turning it around, I have a SATA power and a PCIe cord hanging out of the other side. So storage is huge for a home server. This is a 10 terabyte hard drive that I picked up on Facebook Marketplace for about $80. Got an insane deal on it from a guy who I don't really think knew what he had. This case is not designed to fit a hard drive. This is actually a spot for a vertical mount GPU, but I'm gonna try and work a 3.5 drive into here instead of a GPU for the time being. So I had this little bracket laying around from an old build. I'm gonna go ahead and try and use those screw holes to mount it to the points that are on the spine of the case inside. And I'm just using some machine screws here. I would highly recommend having a pack of these just laying around. And you'll see that little screwdriver head that's randomly in there is gonna come in handy later. So I ended up needing to drill out some extra holes in the bracket here to fit the spine of the case. And you can see I'm lining it up here and just screwing it in with those machine screws. I had to take the power supply off again, but once I got the bracket off, I put the power supply back on, used that little screwdriver head to tighten down the screw I couldn't get to with my screwdriver. And then you can see that 3.5 drive slots right in there really nicely. Additionally, I have a 2 terabyte NVMe, and that's just gonna go on the back of the motherboard in that slot we saw earlier. So now I'm just doing a little bit of cable routing. The power supply came with Velcro ties, which I always appreciate. Just stuffing those back into the case. This wasn't super difficult since I had the extra space without a GPU, but you can see I did as best I could there, just trying to stuff everything in place. And then looking at the back of the case again, I just have that SATA power plugged into the hard drive. So here's me swapping the RAM out. I realized quickly that the 8 gigs was not gonna be enough for what I needed. So I got this 32 gig DDR4 kit, which was only about 50 bucks from Best Buy. And then just clicking that side panel back on, that will complete our build. Really straightforward here. For being such a small form factor case, this was actually really easy to build in. I thought cable management would be more of a challenge, but fortunately everything was nicely packed, and Fractal did a good job designing the pass-throughs so you can fit cables where you need to. And again, I just love the look of the Terra case. Super compact, and I love the finish. So now I'm just prepping a Proxmox boot drive for the PC, and then powering it on for the first time. Everything spun up first try. You can see it booted into the BIOS here. There's a couple things that we needed to tweak. We want to make sure that USB drive is first in the boot priority so we can boot into our OS setup. And then you also want to make sure Intel virtualization is enabled so you can create virtual machines on this machine. We're going to go ahead and save those BIOS settings, and it's going to go ahead and reboot. And now you can see we're in the Proxmox setup screen where we can do our OS configuration. We're actually setting up Proxmox. I'd highly recommend going to the HomeLab wiki and checking out this install setup and Proxmox VE article. This has all the steps that I followed to configure Proxmox for my needs. I'll make sure to leave a link to this in the description, but it has a bunch of screenshots, links, and other great resources to help you guys get up and running with your Proxmox install. So once you have your OS configured, it's going to go ahead and install. Once that's done, it'll go ahead and reboot the system, and you should boot into this screen here, where we can go ahead and start with our Proxmox configuration. Okay, so we're inside of Proxmox, and I'm just going to walk you guys through a couple of things I did to get my desired services up and running. Now, this is definitely going to vary based on the hardware that you guys choose, but if you take a look at the r/homelab subreddit, you can find a lot of answers to things you might be wondering. So first up, right when you get into Proxmox, the first thing I'd recommend is going up here and just changing the color theme to dark mode. This is not an optional step, and it'll make your HomeLab run 10% faster. So the console might be a little intimidating at first, very different from a Windows or Linux setup, but the information presented to you is really helpful, and once you get used to it, it's very easy to navigate. So first up, you just want to check the node that's created and check underneath your summary to make sure all your hardware is detected. You can see here my 6700K is detected with 8 cores. Even though it's a 4-core CPU, it's showing 8 because of hyperthreading. You can also see my 32 gigs of RAM here. This hard drive space is just allocated for the operating system, but if you go down to disks here, you should be able to see all of your drive showing up here. So you can see my 2 terabyte NVMe we installed, as well as that 10 terabyte hard drive. So in terms of configuring your HomeLab, obviously this is going to vary for what you want to get out of your system. So I'm just going to take you guys through a quick overview of the services I have configured here. Obviously this took a lot of tinkering, so I didn't want to record myself fumbling around with all of the settings, but I ended up getting 2 virtual machines and 1 LXC for Jellyfin up and running on my server. So let's walk you guys through each process and show you guys how I configured them. The NAS here is running on TrueNAS. And this is just a simple Debian install. When you go ahead and create a new VM, you're gonna come here to create VM in the top right. You're gonna give it an ID, so just start at 100 and work your way up. Pass in your OS from an ISO image, and to get an ISO image, you can come down to local PVE here, or whatever it's named for you. Go to ISO images, and then you can either upload one from your computer or download from a URL. So you can see here, I have the TrueNAS ISO to run TrueNAS, and I also have an Xubuntu ISO. So TrueNAS has a pretty straightforward setup. I'm not gonna get into the actual details of how I configured it, but once you have it up and running, from this terminal interface, you can do a lot of the basic config you need to get yourself up and running. And then you can just go to your web browser, go to the IP that you set when you configure it, and then you're gonna go ahead and log in with the credentials that you also created when you set up the virtual machine. Inside of TrueNAS, you can mount your individual disks as pools. There's a whole bunch of setup guides out there for how to do TrueNAS. If you guys want me to make a tutorial, I'm happy to do that for you guys as well. But it's relatively straightforward, and there's lots of resources out there on the internet to help you get started. The other virtual machine I set up here is a Linux game server that's running Xubuntu. This is just for me to host a Texit server for me and my friends to play on. So this has dedicated resources. If you come over to summary, you can see that I allocated 4 cores of my processor, as well as 8 gigs of RAM here. And this is a Texit 4 server that I run for me and my friends. I just downloaded the server folder from the internet, and then you can go ahead and just run your game server on here. And as long as this virtual machine is running, your game server will stay online. The last service I configured was a Jellyfin LXC. Now this was definitely a little bit more complicated. Again, there's lots of tutorials online, and I'm happy to make a dedicated video to that if you guys are interested. But this is a media hosting service that runs on your own hardware. There's a mobile app on your phone that you can download to stream all of your media that's uploaded to your libraries here. This was one of the main reasons I built my HomeLab to begin with. I really wanted to cancel Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, etc. And having all of your media streamable from Jellyfin on a NAS that you host yourself gives you a lot of control, and obviously frees you from all of those subscriptions you've been paying for. The Jellyfin setup wasn't too bad, but mounting the drives and getting it to connect to the storage on the NAS is a little bit difficult, and again, like, it's pretty specific to your hardware that you have installed. So I can show you guys in a separate video what this actually looks like. For now, just know that this Jellyfin server is up and running, connected to my NAS, which has the 10 terabyte hard drive on it. So that's just a basic overview of Proxmox and my services I have configured here. Obviously, this is going to change, and I plan to add and modify some of the things I have here already. A lot of these I was just kind of practicing with and testing out to make sure I could get hardware to allocate correctly and show up on the dashboard. But again, there's a lot of great tutorials online, especially on the subreddit and on the Proxmox Home Lab wiki.
So thank you guys for sticking around for this video. I hope you guys learned a thing or two about home servers. This was definitely a huge learning experience for me. Setting up the virtual machines, breaking stuff, and building it all in an ITX form factor made this a really challenging and fun weekend build project. So again, if you guys have questions about anything I did in this video, please leave them below, and I'll be happy to make a dedicated guide to a specific service you guys need help configuring. But I hope to do more of these weekend build projects. Leave your ideas below for my next project, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.